First, we will start with our top story. We'll go to Germany because as voters in Bavaria head to the polls this weekend, they could be choosing much more than who will lead Germany's second most populous state. The direction of the country is on the line and perhaps the political fate of German Chancellor Angela Merkel. Bavarian Premier Markus Söder is vigorously campaigning for the ruling Christian Social Union. In 12 out of the last 13 elections, the CSU has won 12 absolute majorities. But that could all change this weekend. According to several polls, the coalition partner of Angela Merkel's Christian Democratic Union has seen a huge drop in support. And poised to pick up those votes are the far-right anti-immigrant AfD and pro-European Greens. All right, first let's take a look at this situation. I will go to you, Hans. How big of a shake-up is this?
Oh, I think it's significant because the CSU, as you already said in your moderation, will not be able to command anymore by itself the government. It will have to look for coalition partners. And they can only be free voters or maybe even the Greens. It's possible, even theoretically, a grand coalition. But behind it is really another defeat for Chancellor Merkel, because it's not the first regional election where her party or her partner is suffering a major defeat.
It is not the first. So is it something shocking, Valentina? I would put that to you.
I think it's telling of a trend that has been going on for a few years now, because we've seen it last year with the Dutch elections, for instance, where the same phenomenon happened of the centrist parties, center-right and center-left, being squeezed by the extremes, by the far-right, but also by the leftist Greens, as we see now in Bavaria. So I think it's also a litmus test a little bit of what will happen next year in the European elections for the European Parliament.
Absolutely. Yeah, and I'd like to bring up some graphics here, because let's take a look at just how much political opinions have changed in Bavaria. It's very interesting. In the 2013 state election, the CSU won 47.7% of the vote and took 101 out of 180 seats in the state parliament. A recent poll suggests that the party could see a big drop. It is currently polling at 33%. And that same poll has the Green Party polling at a record 18%, and the Alternative for Germany party is polling at 10% for its first appearance in Bavarian state elections. All right, Darren, what is driving this?
Well, this is the really interesting point, isn't it? In some regards, it is a replica of what we're seeing elsewhere in Europe, where we're seeing centrist parties losing votes to the fracture of politics and other political parties. But, you know, it is not a coincidence that between 2013 and 2018, there was a massive crisis involving migration in 2015 that I think is still clearly playing with German voters. And also the recent squabbling within Angela Merkel's grand coalition government, not least of all with Mr. Seehofer, I think is also hurting the CSU in Bavaria. Now, earlier I spoke to Manfred Weber. He is, of course, a very prominent politician from Bavaria. He is, I think, currently on his way there to campaign in the final few days. And I think we've got an interview with him. And I started off by asking him precisely...
Yeah, we will indeed, because you had spoken to him earlier today, right? All right, but first let's get the view, because you did mention something really interesting about the 2015 the migration decision of Angela Merkel. All right, because this I think really has become one of the sticking points. And let's get the view on the ground. Let's cross over to Bavaria. I'm joined by Markus Feldenkirchen, a reporter with the Germany's Der Spiegel magazine. All right, please give us the view from the ground there. I mean, what Angela Merkel took a gamble in 2015. Is she going to pay for this right now?
Is, I mean, even the possibility that the party could drop down to 33%, as you mentioned, would have been considered a miracle only a year ago. What is the reason for the decline? First of all, the CSU is in a way a victim of their own success. They modernized Bavaria extremely. They fostered economic growth, and the country became more and more attractive to citizens from all over Germany who moved there. And by that, somehow transformed the mindset of the Bavarian population, making Bavaria a less traditional country than it was for all the past decades. And secondly, you're right, the party lost lost an enormous amount of trust due to its confusing policies when it comes to migration. They criticized Chancellor Angela Merkel harshly for her more liberal stand on refugees, calling for rejection of further refugees and a much stricter border control. And by that, they raised expectations and failed to fulfill their promises, because in the end, they always lost to Angela Merkel.
All right. When you've been talking to a lot of the voters, I mean, are they going to the left or to the Greens or to the AFD based on ideology, or we just don't want to stick to the mainstream anymore? What is driving them to go either way?
Well, first of all, they lost trust in the capability of the CSU to solve the problems, and they are driven by ideology. You're right. The former voters who are not happy about their policies on refugees, they turn to the AfD, and on the other side, many Christian voters flip over to the Green Party recently.
All right. Thank you very much for bringing us that view from Bavaria. Markus Feldenkirchen, a reporter with Germany's Der Spiegel magazine. Thank you very much. All right, Hans, I'd like to ask you, is this setting the tone for a different political path for Germany?
Well, I have to object to something what he just said, that this is sort of a typical Bavarian situation. We have another election later this month in Hesse, which is another major German state, and the prediction is exactly the same. They are going to lose 10 percentage points at least, the CSU, and the AfD gets even more support in Hesse than in Bavaria. And look, I myself was one of the people who started together with the AfD. I left the party because of its right-wing movement, because of its racist tones, because of its pro-Putin attitude, the attitude against free market enterprise and so on. And when we left the party in August 2015, there was not a single newspaper, including the Spiegel, which didn't say the party is gone, it's finished, it's over. And in the polls, they were way below the 5% threshold. And then came the September 5, Mrs. Merkel opening the border. And that saved this party. It resurrected the party. So let's not forget, this is the overriding issue, not only in Germany, but everywhere in Europe. And we will perhaps later talk about Brexit. The last discussions in Britain were also only about immigration.
Very interesting. And we were trying to get a lot more German voices actually here. And that's, Darren, you were trying to do that today as you were...
Yeah, indeed. And as I say, we are going to now hear, I think, from Manfred Weber. I did put into the CSU in some regards should be rewarded for what they've done. There is hardly any unemployment. The economy is doing remarkably well. Crime is low. This in normal circumstances, even though they've been around and in control for years, the CSU should be rewarded. And so I was trying to put to him, what does he think? What are the reasons? Why are the polls so bad? Let's have a listen to Manfred Weber.
So all over Europe, the migration question is a dominating issue in the campaign. And we are at the moment suffering as CSU from this debate. I think what we have to do is to give people an idea that we have a solution. We can solve the problem. And that means, first of all, that Europe must deliver. On the European Council meeting next week, I expect really results on these questions, because otherwise we will feed the populists if we cannot give a proper answer.
In saying that, there's obviously been internal bickering, though, as well, with Mr. Seehofer and Ms. Merkel. I mean, how much, again, do you think that's had to play? People don't like to see parties fighting with one another.
Well, as CSU, we have a common idea how to solve problems, and we have a common base for this. And I respect very much what Horst Seehofer is doing in German level, on the national level, to guarantee that the rules and the legislation is properly implemented in the daily life, because that was a problem in 2015, that people had the feeling that this is not anymore under control, the migration flows and so on. So to win back the control of the state in all these questions is an important job for us. And on the other hand, also that the Prime Minister in Bavaria is doing a job to implement again the legislation. So we are coming back in a way to a trustful procedure also in the migration fields, but that takes time.
none of the polls are showing that the CSU is likely to get above 40%. They're normally right. I mean, will Mr. Seehofer have to resign if he doesn't get 40%, if you don't get 40%?
We are in campaign. In campaign, we are fighting with the other political parties. We are showing people the alternatives, and then people will decide. And then the CSU must analyze and must discuss the future afterwards. But for the moment, there is no party internal discussion needed. We have to convince people.
You wouldn't stand for that position, though, if he was to resign?
Horst Seehofer is elected till 2019, and we are a team. We want to work together and want to convince people.
That wasn't a no.
We are working together again. That is a position. Again, there is no discussion about the party leader at the moment going on, because he is elected for another year, and we want to be, as a team, convincing towards the people. That is what we want to do.
Our panelists reacting here to Manfred Weber.
Well, a pretty strong reaction from you.
I tell you, there was a clear contradiction. I mean, the guy said on one hand, we need a European solution to the immigration crisis.
And how great Mr.
Then shortly
Seehofer
after
is
that,
doing.
the state must have control of who comes into the country.
He's between a rock and a hard place. I mean, on the one hand, he's a Merkelite, he's an ally of Chancellor Merkel. On the other hand, he is a CSU party member, and Horst Seehofer is his party boss. And Mr. Seehofer clashed with Ms. Merkel precisely over migration, even threatened to undo the entire coalition earlier this year. So it's kind of understandable why he was waffling like that. But I don't think for voters this comes across as a very strong political message that inspires
a lot of
politicians waffling. My word. We have to remember he wants to become EPP candidate for the Commission President.
Absolutely.
He needs Angela Merkel's support.
Exactly.
Which really is a joke. I mean,
well, as we were...
Not a fan.
Exactly,
clearly
not a fan. But as